I'm a 27-year-old woman, and I have a younger brother who is 23 years old. A few months ago, I decided to let him come and live with me. Back when he was in high school, and even during his college years, he was very much into partying. He spent so much time enjoying himself that he didn't focus much on his studies. As you might guess, this meant that his grades weren't great. He also didn't gain any work experience during this time, which made it hard for him to find a good job after he finished school. He's quite stubborn about not wanting to take jobs that don't pay well. He believes that he's meant to do something much more significant. Those are his exact words, not something I'm saying for him. Our parents thought it would be a good idea for him to live with me for a bit. They hoped that by being around me, he might learn how to be more independent. You see, when he was living at our parents' house, he didn't do much besides playing video games in his room all day. Whenever our parents tried to talk to him about finding a job, he would become upset. He felt like they were always on his case about it, which made him very defensive. I've always had a soft spot for my brother and cared for him deeply, so when our parents asked if he could stay with me, I said yes. I thought maybe I could help him change his ways. He seemed quite pleased with the arrangement and moved in without any hesitation. However, for the first few weeks after he moved in, nothing really changed. He continued with the same habits he had at our parents' house, spending most of his time engaged in leisure activities like playing video games, much like before. At our parents' house, I realized that if I wanted my brother to change his direction in life, I needed to step in and guide him myself. So, I took some time to sit down with him and share some wisdom about the value of starting work early. I shared my own experience, explaining how I began working while I was still in college. By the time I graduated, I had gathered enough work experience to secure a job that paid well. I acknowledged that he had missed this early start, but I also stressed that it wasn't too late for him to make a positive change in his life. I reminded him that our parents wouldn't always be there to support us, and I pointed out that I would eventually have my own family to take care of and wouldn't be able to support him indefinitely. This conversation seemed to spark something in him, and he began to show signs of taking his life more seriously. He mentioned that he would start looking for job opportunities online and would work on improving himself. While I wasn't entirely sure if he was genuinely searching for jobs, whenever I checked on him, he appeared to be engaged in something productive. A few months later, he came to me with a request that took me by surprise. He wanted to borrow money from my savings to invest in a new business venture he was planning with some friends. They had the idea to open a gaming and electronics store, a project that required a significant amount of capital for his share of the investment. He explained that he preferred not to involve our parents in this financial matter and had therefore approached me. He assured me that once the business began to generate profits, he would repay the money. Moreover, he offered an even more enticing proposal, making me a partner in their venture. On the surface, their business plan seemed solid, and he and his friends appeared to have thought through their strategy for launching the store. After my brother presented his business idea to me, I decided to discuss it with our parents to get their perspective. To my surprise, they were quite supportive of the plan and encouraged me to invest in my brother's venture. Feeling a bit more reassured, I also sought advice from a friend of mine who works as a lawyer. She wisely suggested that to protect my investment and ensure everything was clear and fair, I should have my brother sign a legal agreement. This document would outline that he would either repay the money I lent him or make me a partner in the business. She emphasized that even though we're family, it's important not to rely solely on trust and verbal agreements when it comes to financial matters. Taking her advice to heart, I decided to proceed with the legal document. However, when I brought up the idea of signing a contract to my brother, he hesitated. He argued that because we were family, such formalities shouldn't be necessary. Despite my reservations about his reluctance, I reassured him that the document was just a precaution and not something he should worry about. Eventually, I was able to persuade him to sign it, but only after emphasizing that it was merely a formality. Following this, I gave him access to my savings account by adding him to my bank card, with the stipulation that he could use up to half of the funds, but no more than that without my explicit permission. Over the last 8 years, I had managed to save $25,000, a sum I had painstakingly accumulated with the goal of buying my own house in the suburbs and moving out of my rented apartment. This money represented years of hard work and numerous sacrifices, so it held great significance to me. I made it clear to my brother that he needed to respect the limit I set and consult me if he found himself in need of additional funds. Under no circumstances was he to exceed the $12,000 threshold without first getting my approval. A few months back, I made the decision to give my brother access to my savings account. by linking him to my bank card. This was so he could use some of the funds for his new business venture. Initially, I made a point to keep an eye on how much money he was using. To my surprise, for the first few weeks, he didn't spend any money from the account at all. Then, he moved in with his friends to focus more intensely on getting their business off the ground. I intended to keep monitoring his spending closely. However, life got busy for me as I started working on a new project, and I completely forgot to check on the account. By the time I remembered to take a look, several weeks had passed. To my utter dismay, I discovered that the account had been drained, with only a few $100s left. The realization that the savings I had worked so hard to accumulate were gone left me reeling in shock. During the time he was away, we had stayed in touch, mostly talking about the progress of his store, which he reported was going well. He never mentioned anything about the money, and with my own busy schedule, I hadn't thought to inquire. I had placed my trust in him, believing there was no need to worry. Unfortunately, that trust was misplaced. Confronted with the empty bank account, I felt compelled to call him and demand an explanation. His initial reaction was to claim a misunderstanding, but his excuses were far from believable. As I pressed him for the truth, he finally confessed that he and his friends had used the money for gambling and lost it all. Hearing his admission, I was overwhelmed with disappointment and frustration. He apologized, claiming he had intentions of recovering the money but needed more time. At that moment my emotions took over, and rather than continuing the confrontation, I ended the call and allowed myself to cry, mourning the loss of my hard-earned savings. I couldn't believe that he had not only squandered the money I had entrusted to him, but had also gambled it away on a whim. This wasn't just any money. It represented years of dedication, hard work, and numerous sacrifices, all aimed at securing my future. The fact that he used it for gambling, of all things, was a betrayal I found hard to comprehend. Finding out that my brother had misused my trust and the money I had saved was a huge blow to me. It was hard to accept that all the money was gone, especially knowing that it was unlikely my brother could recover it on his own. Fortunately, I still had some funds left for my everyday needs and to cover my bills, but that didn't make the situation any less upsetting. Feeling both angry and betrayed, I decided to call my parents after I had stopped crying to inform them of what had occurred. They were understandably shocked by the news, but surprisingly suggested that I should still keep faith in my brother and give him a chance to rectify the situation. This advice felt absurd to me, given that my brother's actions had completely shattered any trust or faith I had in him. The fact that my parents were trying to defend him felt like a slap in the face, adding insult to injury. I made it clear to them that my brother needed to find a job and start repaying me, or they should compensate me themselves. I reminded them that my brother had signed a legal document agreeing to repay the loan or make me a partner in his venture, which had failed to materialize. Therefore, he was obligated to return the money, and if he didn't, I was prepared to take legal action against him. The last thing I wanted was to involve the courts and deal with the ensuing drama, but I was ready to do so if necessary. Rather than understanding my position, my parents attempted to guilt-trip me. They argued that taking legal action against my brother was wrong, emphasizing our familial ties and suggesting that I should simply forgive him and move on. Their unwillingness to either reimburse me or hold my brother accountable was incredibly disheartening. It made me realize just how self-centered and unfair my family was being in this situation. I stood firm in my resolve, telling my parents that my priority was getting my money back, regardless of our family relationship. I was fully prepared to pursue legal action if that was what it took to recover my savings. The situation had made it clear to me that my family was not considering my best interests, and I was willing to go to court to ensure justice was served. Despite everything, my parents maintained their stance and even went as far as to threaten to sever ties with me if I decided to pursue legal action against my brother. They somehow saw me as the wrongdoer in this situation, continuing to defend him on the grounds that he was still young and bound to make mistakes. However, I couldn't see it that way. After all, my brother was nearly 24 years old, an age by which I was already working and managing my own expenses. While I agree that everyone is allowed to make mistakes, deliberately gambling away someone else's savings doesn't just fall under the category of a simple mistake. It was a conscious decision he made, followed by attempts to deceive me about it. I started doubting whether there was ever a genuine business plan to begin with. It seemed more likely that the idea of starting a business was nothing but empty talk, a facade they never intended to bring to fruition. But the existence or non-existence of the business was beside the point for me. My focus was solely on getting my money back, no matter the cost, even if it meant confronting my own family. So a few weeks ago, I took the significant step of filing a lawsuit against my brother to reclaim the money he had squandered. As expected, this decision did not sit well with my parents. When the legal notice was delivered to my brother, who was still staying with his friends, the reaction from my family was extreme. My brother was particularly shocked to find out about the lawsuit. Despite their shock and their numerous attempts to dissuade me from going through with the lawsuit, through apologies, pleas, and even emotional manipulation, I stood firm. Letting go of the lawsuit was not an option for me. The challenge was immense given that my family has always been a vulnerable spot for me, but I knew I couldn't let them exploit my feelings to escape accountability. The value I placed on my own hard work and the savings I had accumulated over the years was far greater than my attachment to people who showed they only cared about their own interests. In this battle for what was rightfully mine, I was prepared to match their selfishness with my determination, driven by the principle that my efforts and my financial security deserved to be respected and protected. To protect my future and reclaim the money that was rightfully mine, I knew I had to stand firm, even against my brother, who attempted to mollify me with promises of repayment when he could afford it. However, his assurances fell on deaf ears. After watching him squander his own potential and our parents' resources for so long, I was determined not to let him take advantage of me in the same way. My brother had become someone I could no longer recognize, showing little gratitude or respect, a transformation I attributed to our parents' failure to instill any sense of responsibility or discipline in him. But I decided that their inability to guide him properly was no longer my concern. As part of our efforts to resolve this financial conflict, we've undergone a few mediation sessions with our respective lawyers. During these sessions, I found myself feeling particularly frustrated, mainly due to their defensive stance. They seemed unwilling to acknowledge their mistakes, portraying themselves as the wronged parties, which only added to my anger and determination. Amidst this family turmoil, a revelation from my uncle added a new layer of complexity to my feelings towards my parents and brother. Our relationship was already strained, but this information further deepened the rift. My uncle, having discussed the situation with my mother, his sister, felt compelled to disclose a truth about my college education. Growing up, my parents emphasized the importance of my studies, framing their financial support for my college tuition as a significant sacrifice. They insisted that I work hard to justify their investment, implying that I was to repay them for this generosity in the future, a responsibility I took seriously and have been fulfilling. However, it turns out that the narrative of their financial sacrifice for my education was misleading. The truth about my college tuition and the choice of my college was actually linked to my uncle, not my parents, as I had been led to believe. They had borrowed money from him, not for my education at a prestigious university, but to afford my brother's private schooling, which left me to attend a less prestigious institution that was merely my backup option. Despite having been accepted into my top choice school, I was steered away from it under the pretense that it was too expensive for our family's budget. However, the reality was that the funds were there. My parents simply prioritized my brother, who suggested that our parents manipulate the situation to ensure he could go to the private school of his choice. I was unaware of this deception for a long time, believing he attended a public school as I did. Discovering that my parents would take such extreme measures for my brother's satisfaction was a shocking revelation. Throughout my time in college, and as my brother simultaneously completed his education, the facade was maintained. My absences from home, limited to holiday visits, made it easier for them to conceal the truth about my brother's schooling. By the time I had completed my 4-year degree, so had he, and the opportunity for me to uncover their deceit naturally diminished. The realization that my brother exhibited manipulative behaviors from as young as 14, and that such actions were condoned and even facilitated by our parents was deeply unsettling. My uncle, who had kept this secret until recently, justified his silence by considering it outside his place to intervene. Meanwhile, my parents saw no merit in disclosing the truth, opting instead to perpetuate a lie that would last for years. The shock of this revelation was compounded when my uncle provided concrete evidence of the financial transactions he had made to support my education, sending me records of the money transfers to my mother. This proof laid bare the extent of the deception and the lengths to which my family was willing to go to prioritize my brother's wishes over my own academic and personal growth. In discovering the truth about my college tuition, I realized that it was actually my uncle whom I had been repaying all this time, not my parents. This revelation made their deceit even harder to forgive, as they had contributed nothing towards my education. Yet, they didn't hesitate to use it as leverage against me. Every time we had a disagreement, they'd remind me of the supposed debt I owed them, a debt that, as it turned out, didn't exist at all. The realization that one's own family could exhibit such callousness was shocking, yet it seemed to be the reality of my situation. With a few days remaining until our next scheduled meeting, I found myself unable to wait any longer to address this betrayal. The hurt and betrayal I felt compelled me to confront my brother directly. Although I had refrained from cutting off communication with my family due to a reluctance to take such a final step, I discovered that they had preemptively blocked me, preventing any direct conversation. This discovery only fueled my anger further. In a moment of indignation, I decided to expose my brother's actions to his circle of friends. I was certain he hadn't shared the truth with them, particularly because they came from affluent backgrounds and he was sensitive about his own financial status. He had always been keen on maintaining a certain image to blend in with them, despite being 24 years old. I had previously avoided sharing this information with his friends, considering it to be a petty and immature response to our family issues. However, armed with the truth about the lengths to which my brother had gone to deceive me, my perspective shifted. I couldn't stand by idly after being manipulated and wronged repeatedly, so I embarked on a mission to track down a few of his close friends. After some effort and a bit of online sleuthing, I managed to locate them, ready to shed light on the reality of the situation. After locating his friends, I decided to share the entire situation with them through a group message, not holding back any details about the trouble my brother had gotten himself into. I thought that being completely open about everything would somehow make me feel better, and it did, at least for a moment. Sharing the truth about my brother's financial deception and legal troubles brought me a sense of relief, exactly as I had anticipated. However, the aftermath of my actions quickly unfolded. The very next day, my mother began sending me a flurry of texts, urging me to apologize to my brother's friends and retract my statements. It turned out that upon learning about my brother's involvement in a legal dispute and his facade of financial stability, his friends decided to expel him from the shared living arrangement they had. My mother conveyed that his friends, who valued wealth and status, abandoned him upon discovering the truth. In my view, the fallout was a just consequence for both my brother and his superficial friends. Yet my mother accused me of exacerbating the situation, claiming that my decision to involve his friends in the subsequent eviction and ostracization were steps too far. She argued that I was compounding the family's difficulties by extending the conflict beyond the legal sphere and into his personal relationships. Attempting to discuss the revelations shared by my uncle proved impossible as my mother was too upset to engage in a rational conversation. Her reaction was unprecedented. I had never witnessed her so distraught, her voice filled with an intensity that was both shocking and revealing of the deep tensions my actions had stirred within the family. Background noises hinted at turmoil at home, with faint sounds suggesting my brother was lashing out in anger, possibly damaging property, while my father tried to manage the chaos. This family upheaval, a direct consequence of my revelations and the lawsuit, didn't bring the satisfaction I had expected. Instead, it highlighted the deep fractures within my family and the complex web of emotions and relationships that had been disrupted. The realization that my actions had not only led to my brother's expulsion from his living situation but also strained familial bonds left me with mixed feelings. The desire for justice and accountability had led to unforeseen consequences, underscoring the complexity of balancing personal grievances with family dynamics. Update 1. Just wanted to share a quick update because I'm currently at work, but something interesting happened. I got an email from one of my brother's friends. They explained that they had asked my brother to move out, not because of any financial disparities, but due to the ongoing deceit and the facade he had maintained over the years. The issue wasn't just that he wasn't as wealthy as them, it was the constant pretense and the lies that ultimately led them to sever ties with him. My brother had apparently been going to great lengths to appear wealthier than he was, including lavish spending and showcasing his lifestyle, which often resulted in him spending far more than any of his friends did. There were instances when his friends visited our family home and were taken aback by its simplicity, especially given the supposed wealth of our family. My brother had concocted a story that our parents preferred to live modestly to avoid appearing arrogant, a narrative that my parents apparently supported, perpetuating the illusion of affluence. This whole situation is bewildering to me. I'm torn between finding humor in their desperate attempts for validation and feeling embarrassed by the lengths to which they've gone to maintain this facade. It's quite pitiful, really. However, his friends expressed their gratitude towards me for unveiling the truth. They felt they could no longer associate with someone like my brother, who went as far as to deceive his own family to boast about fictitious wealth. Their reasoning was that if he could betray his sister in such a manner, there was no telling what he might do to them in the future to impress others. In a way, it seems my actions inadvertently helped reveal my brother's true character to his friends, preventing them from potentially being manipulated by him down the line. So in that sense, I guess I did manage to do some good out of this situation. It's been a couple of days since my mom's emotional outburst, and I haven't heard from her since. We have a mediation session scheduled in 4 days. If we're unable to resolve our issues and reach an agreement in this upcoming meeting, we might have to consider taking the matter to trial, which is something I'm hoping we can avoid. If this situation escalates to a trial, it looks like my brother will find himself in a really tough spot. Part of me finds the thought somewhat satisfying, given everything that's happened. However, continuing with legal proceedings means that I'll have to keep covering the costs of my lawyer's services. Thankfully, she's a friend and is offering me a discounted rate, but the expenses are still a burden for me. I'm caught in a dilemma about whether pursuing a trial is truly in my best interest, especially since I doubt my family will easily concede now that I've brought my brother's actions to light. Right now, I'm left guessing about how my family might react or what steps they might take next. Just when I thought I couldn't be more unsure, something unexpected happened. It hasn't even been a full day since my last update and my family decided to pay me a surprise visit. They showed up at my doorstep, without any lawyers or official documents in hand, almost resembling an angry mob, just without the pitchforks. Given our recent history and my brother's last outburst, where he reacted violently, breaking things in a fit of rage, I couldn't trust them. So I opted to speak to them in the hallway, keeping a safe barrier between us. The thought of letting them into my home, especially my brother, felt too risky. I worried he might cause damage or worse given his recent behavior. During our conversation, I discreetly activated the sound recorder on my phone to capture everything said. My parents attempted to use emotional manipulation, suggesting we settle the dispute for a fraction of what was owed to me, citing family bonds and the adverse impact this conflict was having on my brother's mental well-being as reasons. My brother, for his part, pleaded with me, claiming he was making efforts to turn his life around and asking for my assistance. He suggested a settlement of about $5,000, a sum far less than what he had taken, as a way to resolve the issue. Their sudden appearance and the arguments they presented left me in a difficult position, weighing the value of family ties against the need for justice and accountability for the actions that had led us here. During their visit, my family repeatedly assured me they would repay the money they owed, but their promises fell on deaf ears. I was acutely aware that they had the means to repay me, but chose not to, out of sheer greed and selfishness. Firm in my resolve, I made it clear to them that I wouldn't accept any settlement and warned them against attempting to contact me again without my lawyer's presence. I even went as far as to threaten calling the police if they disregarded my wishes. Unsurprisingly, this confrontation escalated my brother's anger, leading him to kick my door with considerable force as they were leaving. After they had gone, I inspected the damage and found the door to be splintered at the point of impact. Though the door remained intact, it was visibly damaged. I made sure to document this damage, too. I contemplated calling the police right then, but considering it was late and following my lawyer's advice that the audio evidence captured by my security cameras was sufficient, I decided against involving the police further. My brother also made a threatening remark about making me pay for the actions I was taking against him, which I captured on record. Armed with this evidence, I felt somewhat more secure about the potential outcome, even if the situation escalated to a court trial. My primary goal remained clear: to recover the money owed to me and obtain a restraining order against my family members who had shown a complete disregard for anyone's well-being but their own. 3 weeks have passed since that incident, and I realized I hadn't provided an update on the situation. At our next mediation session, I presented the evidence of their attempt to intimidate and threaten me into settling for a mere $5,000. I made it known that I was prepared to escalate the matter to a trial, expressing my desire to see my brother face legal consequences for his actions. My family came to the realization that I was serious about taking legal action against them. They understood that I was fully prepared to follow through with my threats, which ultimately led them to concede. Reluctantly, they agreed to repay the money they owed me, and also cover the costs of repairing the damage to my door. A small act of retribution on my part, perhaps petty, but satisfying nonetheless. In addition, I succeeded in obtaining a restraining order against them, particularly because of the threatening remarks my brother made and his track record of dishonesty, manipulation, and immature outbursts. As for repaying my uncle, I've taken it upon myself to handle it directly. My relationship with my mother has deteriorated to the point of no contact, making this the most straightforward way to ensure my uncle is reimbursed. These past weeks have been incredibly hectic for me, but despite everything, I find myself in a better place now. The weight of dealing with my family's toxic behavior has been lifted from my shoulders, allowing me to move forward more freely. I've come to learn that my family has been spreading negative stories about our conflict to other relatives in an attempt to isolate me within the wider family circle. Their efforts, however, have been largely unsuccessful. It seems that the rest of the family is skeptical of their claims, likely due to their history of playing the victim and their narcissistic tendencies. By standing up to their deceit and manipulative tactics, I've exposed their true nature. If given the chance, I wouldn't hesitate to call them out on their behavior once more.